Hello and welcome. I'm Jeannie Long, Executive Director of Chicago Collections Consortium, and thank you for joining us today for our discussion with Autumn Mather and Molly Szymanski, curators of CCC's latest digital exhibit, A Snapshot of Chicago Art Fairs 1948 to 2004. Please note that today's discussion will be recorded and available for viewing again on Chicago Collections website and YouTube channel. We'd like to begin Chicago Collections program with our land acknowledgement statement, which reads, CCC acknowledges and is grateful for the Native people who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago outdoor spaces, we invite you to join in offering respect and gratitude to the many indigenous people that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. I know many of you who are listening today are familiar with Chicago Collections resources, but for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, CCC is a consortium of over 60 museums and libraries, all working together for the preservation and promotion of Chicago's history and culture. Now, we do that through the sharing of our member collections on CCC's Explore Chicago Collections portal, which provides free and open access to our members' archival holdings, as well as we also host free public programs and digital exhibits. We invite you to visit CCC's Explore website and check out these unique collections. We also encourage you to jump on our website to see upcoming listing of events, and hopefully we'll see you again in another program. I want to acknowledge and thank CCC's donors shown here, whose generous funding allows us to offer free, amazing programming events like this one today, as well as supporting our efforts with the Explore Chicago Collections portal. A snapshot of Chicago Art Fairs 1948 to 2004 is funded by the Terra Foundation for American Art. CCC remains extremely grateful for the support of the Terra Foundation. This exhibit is part of Art Design Chicago, a citywide collaboration initiated by the Terra Foundation for American Art that highlights the city's artistic heritage and creative community. It's been an honor for CCC to be in partnership with other organizations across the city on this initiative, and many thanks to the Terra Foundation for facilitating these opportunities and discussions and offerings. Thank you. But a big thank you to Autumn Mather and Molly Szymanski for your work on the exhibit, but also taking time for our conversation. And I'd like to begin with a question for both of you, just a little bit about your backgrounds and why this topic was of interest to you. Autumn?
Thank you, Jeannie. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you to all of you who are here with us. Molly and I really enjoyed working on this exhibition and are very excited to be able to share the wonderful things that we uncovered in member collections with you and with a wider audience and community interested in art in Chicago. I began my career in Chicago at the Newberry, which held some important archival collections that were related to the arts, Arts Club Chicago and the Palette and Chisel collection. Both are located there. And so that got me interested in the history of the arts in Chicago. I went from there to the Ryerson and Burnham libraries, which is where I met Molly, and worked there and was able to delve much further into this topic through both the archival and artist file collections that are available in the Ryerson and Burnham libraries holdings, and just became really interested in the way in which Chicago has developed this very celebratory and festive relationship with art, and how the art fairs have also intersected with other questions in that are of interest to a broad scholarly population, such as gentrification, urban development, the way that various ethnic groups in Chicago work together, and so forth. So that is what brought me to the topic, and I'll turn things over to Molly.
Thanks, Autumn. Autumn's very humble. Um, there's probably a lot of people that work in the arts and arts research in Chicago who have been assisted in their research and helped by Autumn over the last, couple decades. So she is very knowledgeable and very integral to just the art research community in Chicago in general. So nice try.
Molly, before you begin too, you serving on CCC's programming, co-chair of CCC's programming committee has been a huge force in our work, not only on digital exhibits, but programming. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about not only your background and the topic of the exhibit, but also maybe you could walk us through a little bit and also share a bit about the time period of the centralized focus of that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, my background is for a few decades, I worked in community-based organization, a lot of different nonprofit and advocacy things. And then I came to digital archiving for the last 7 or 8 years. So my background is in digital archiving. I've worked at Art Institute, and which is a CCC member organization. That's how I got involved in being
founding member. Yes.
Yes. Being involved in the as co-chair of the programming committee for CCC for the last 5 years, 6 years. It's been a while. So I'm still doing that. So it's just a chance to work on one of the digital exhibits is really exciting for me, and specifically, I think this topic, extending our partnership with Tara, which has been great for the last few years, and also a chance to learn about smaller art fairs and sort of, that history, especially since some of this stuff is kind of ephemeral or, not all of these art fairs. There's some big ones that we'll talk about that, have been around forever that have a lot of name recognition in the city. So I had familiarity with that, but just getting a chance to learn about, smaller community-based kind of grassrootsy stuff that is associated with art fairs in Chicago is really what interested me personally. So I think I can talk through just really quickly the exhibit itself. So for us, when we approached this topic, there's a lot of different, we weren't quite sure what we were going to find. And there's a lot of different directions we could have sort of taken a different focus. But for us, ultimately, what we decided was we wanted to highlight as many member collections as possible, as many areas of the city as possible, and just as much diversity as we could, just to really unearth as much as we could. That was going to be, our goal. And so for us, based on what we could find in the member collections, and which I think was sort of a really active period in the city for especially smaller community-based art fairs, really turned out to be this kind of time period. So, Autumn will talk about a little bit, kind of what made especially the 50s and 60s a really active period for a lot of these fairs in response to things in the city, and kind of moving through to the early part of this year. So as we say in the beginning of the exhibit, is by no means a comprehensive look at every single art fair in the city, but for us it was about giving chance for people to explore as many member collections and as many fairs across parts of the city as possible. So if you want to go to the next slide real quick. So just for folks to give a preview, you should definitely go on the website and explore the exhibit. There's 22 different art fairs that are highlighted. And we gave folks 2 ways to explore, kind of based on what we thought would just be logical ways to navigate, and also just different ways to kind of come at different themes or areas of the city. So there's explore by location, and explore by timeline. So you'll have both of those options. You can go back and do both if you really want. So if you go to the next slide. So when you go to explore by collection, or explore by location, excuse me, you get the option that there's a Google map that is clickable. So you can click on each of those different icons and that shows you where the fair is located. And then it's also organized by just 4 general geographic areas of the city. So if you click on either of the tiles that you can kind of see on the bottom left, you can explore that way and kind of go through each section, click on them individually, kind of whatever you want. And then the explore by timeline kind of gives you a full scope from a timeline standpoint by the date that the fair was founded. So that is sort of what the dates are for each fair, is the date that the fair, to most the best of our ability, we were able to definitively say what date the fair was started. So that is what is marked on the timeline. So you can click on the timeline itself and scroll through, or below that, there's a list. So you can click and then go through that way if you would like as well, all 22 fairs. So it kind of gives folks a different way to explore. There's images and media from collections in each one, as well as a little bit of background and contextual information. So it's really kind of fun to see the scope of things as well. So.
Thanks, Molly. And I think both of you did a great job in terms of explaining, this is not the complete history of Chicago art fairs by any means, but specifically focusing on this time period and also working with what was available in digital of our member digital collections too. And CCC is extremely proud of being able to share member collections in this format as in the digital exhibit format. So what, as curators for this and on this topic, what were like some of the aha, discoverable moments in your work, putting the exhibit together that you found in our member collections, or something that you were surprised by that, oh, this is here. I didn't realize that.
So we were, I think, very happily surprised by the geographic scope that we were able to uncover in the member collections. We also tried to incorporate a number of different types of formats. So we wanted to be able to tell the story of these art fairs through the ephemera that was generated sometimes by the committees or individuals who founded them. We wanted to show the way in which the art fairs reached out to artists, the way in which they promoted themselves to the public. And we were very pleased to see that we were able to find materials in the collections that allowed us to show how things were marketed to both of those audiences. We were able to uncover stories in the collections about how difficult it was to create these art fairs, how things changed over time for some of the art fairs that have very long lives, and how the committees that organize them reacted in order to best address the challenges that they were facing. We also were very pleased to see in the collections some stories of the ways that Chicago collected art, and how the art fairs allowed for people to decorate their new homes in some of these urban renewal projects, Sandburg Village or Lake Meadows, with works by local people, how younger people were encouraged to pursue careers in the arts as a result of these art fairs, where they were able to come into contact with artists, talk to artists, learn about what it was like to be a working artist. And we were able to see over and over again the ways that even if there were vastly differing agendas in creating an art fair. Chicago was successful in creating this opportunity for conversation between practicing artists and people who were interested in their work, often allowing people to see how art was made, and to learn more about one another's work, which I think also is a very important and generative activity of these fairs, that artists are able to come into contact with one another, see how other artists are reacting to sometimes the same subjects, or sometimes working in different ways within the same media. So we were able to find evocative objects, I think, in film and print, and in sketch, and share those in order to help surface some of these stories about the way that artists and patrons were talking to one another over time in the city.
And on that very topic, again, with and a huge thank you to Tara, with funding from the Tara Foundation, we're going to host a public program bringing in artists who are long-standing participants in fairs to really discuss the impact of what these fairs had, not only on their careers as artists, but having that opportunity, as you shared, Autumn, to be able to explain their work, but how they did it in a casual setting, and the educational component to the community as well. It's a very welcoming. If you've walked through an art fair, people feel at ease, to have that conversation. You're not frightened to walk into a gallery, and it's that exchange, which is really lovely for to share additional information too, not just what's the price, but how did you create this, and where did it come from, and that type of communication too. Molly, anything on that front?
Yeah, no, I think Autumn touched on a lot of the really interesting things that we found and are hopefully reflect in the exhibit. I'll just mention one thing too. I think something that was a particularly fun collection to discover was William McBride Jr. papers, which is at the Vivian Hirsch CPL Special Collections. He was an artist and a teacher, and involved in some of the early efforts with Margaret Burroughs to establish the Southside Community Arts Center, and his paper collection is there. And that's definitely not a collection I think Autumn and I would have ever had a reason to explore or look at, but also a special shout out because there's a good chunk of these art fairs that we would not have had visual materials for, and maybe and probably therefore not be able to include in the exhibit if it wasn't for his collection, because he was involved in so many different community organizations, and in addition to the Southside Art Center, and I think attended a lot of fairs and just collected flyers and applications for art fairs and different artists related materials to art fairs, particularly on the South Side. And so I should have counted, but there's at least 5 or 6 maybe that the sole visuals come from his papers. So that was a great find, and I think kind of speaks to a couple, the fact that a lot of these, especially smaller art fairs that tend to be sort of feel kind of transient or not as represented in archival collections, are run by community organizations that maybe kind of stick around for a long time, or maybe kind of ebb and flow and don't always have their papers or their collections in archives. So having someone like him who was involved or has sort of maintained some of those materials was a really great and pretty irreplaceable. I was like looking for the right word. Irreplaceable find, particularly for this, because we needed things to sort of visually be able to represent the fairs. So.
And when we talk about these archival records, though, why do you and Autumn think they're so important to researchers and the general public in terms of not only their uses, but their documents as a record of the time of Chicago in that time period too. What are the importance of that?
I think they have great importance on showing the ways that artists' careers progress. They show the ways in which artists are brought together. And one of the stories that came through very clearly for us in the crafting of the exhibit was the story of Margaret Burroughs. And Margaret Burroughs was one of the co-founders of the Southside Community Art Center. She was an educator in Chicago and also co-founded the DuSable Black History Museum. She exhibited in the very first Hyde Park Art Fair, 57th Street Art Fair, and really, I think found that a vitalizing experience, because she then sought out ways to create opportunities for particularly Southside artists and Black artists to be able to have spaces to exhibit the work that they were creating. And for her, the art fair as an educational experience was paramount. She was very interested in allowing younger people the opportunity to interact with practicing artists. The art fairs she organized often included scholarships to various different types of art education opportunities as prizes in the art fairs. And so they had this sort of social justice mission. And we were really, I think, pleased to see how her influence spread across the South Side, and also that her goals were really achieved. The Lake Meadows Art Fair was one of the earliest to take place on the South Side of Chicago, and was very focused on this educational mission. And after it ends in the early 2000s, it's rejuvenated by the Bronzeville community, and a number of the artists who exhibit in that new art fair, we found evidence of them talking about going to Lake Meadows, seeing artists who looked like them, being able to talk to those people, and how that propelled their career in the arts, which we felt really vindicated her vision. So that was one of the real charming stories for us that came out of these records.
And I loved your coverage of Margaret Burroughs' impact, just as you outlined just now, but also like her vision and her intentionality of having people encouraging collecting of African art, of African American art, of in the community, and really bolstering up artists in general. But as you mentioned, creating those educational opportunities that for the community as well. So just the different layers of what was involved with her work was really interestingly handled by both of you in the exhibit. So no, I think others will find that fascinating as well, and the impact that continues to have in Chicago today, right? So a little bit about Chicago, and its location being in the Midwest. Like, what role, if any, do you think that's played in the success of Chicago's art fairs? Geographically speaking, or citywide speaking?
I think, as you say, being central, it pulls artists from both sides, both coasts, north and south as well. And I think the period that we are focused on in the exhibit particularly was a time in Chicago when our location was key to the success of these fairs. We had a number of people coming to Chicago to attend the Institute of Design, to attend the Art Institute, other commercial art training programs on the GI Bill. We had attracted artists as a result of the strength of Chicago's WPA Federal Art Project work as well. So we had all of these very creative people in this space who had some outlet to create in their daily work. Like Margaret Burroughs was an educator who also created art. We had associations like the Society of Typographic Artists, for example, who also were doing exhibitions of their member work. So these people who had commercial careers were still creating their own artwork or maintaining their own artistic practice and needed an outlet to be able to show that. And so I feel like that really was the base of enthusiasm that started some of these festivals, and then they proliferated. They sort of became professionalized. So in the 60s and 70s, you see that there are publications that are marketing to artists saying, you know, come to Chicago. These are our art fairs. This is how big the audience is. And, you know, you will likely have a successful trip here. And then in the 80s, we start to see things like Art Chicago, where galleries from around the country are bringing their artists to show on Navy Pier or in the Merchandise Mart for a while, and showing artists who have kind of an international reputation and really stimulating the economy for Chicago galleries at that time as well.
No, I think you really captured it. And I think, you know, we had talked about this before we began, you know, Chicago and its Midwestern hospitality, but, you know, people liked, I'll be so bold to say people in Chicago like to collaborate and work together, and CCC being, you know, a prime example of that consortial model of everybody working together too. So, no, and furthering conversations across the city, period. So, no, thank you for that.
I'll just say real quick too, I think, you know, Autumn's touched on this like a little bit, but also just that, which maybe isn't necessarily related to the Chicago location, but I do think kind of, you know, a lot of these fairs were created, I think also, you know, the political climate of the 50s and 60s and early 70s also impacted, I mean, you know, specific to Chicago, but broader things, I think impacted people's sort of sentiments or approaches to stuff. And a lot of these art fairs were created in response to, you know, creating spaces for artists that extended beyond sort of the more traditional institutions, the more established kind of, you know, broadly white art worlds, and, you know, I think kind of prestige driven. And so a lot of these festivals were in response to that for all sorts of different reasons. I think Margaret Burroughs, you know, and her sort of mission, and some of these other ones, even like the 57th Street Art Fair and the Hyde Park Community Art Fair, and, you know, how these neighborhood art fairs that maybe kind of started in a certain way. You know, there's, again, an interesting story there too, struggled with the tension over time of maybe becoming more professionalized, and, you know, kind of that tension between, you know, drawing sort of more of a crowd, or being a place for, you know, maybe more established artists to come versus maintaining that connection to, their specific neighborhood or their community or the artist specific to their neighborhood too. So I think that that's something that a lot of the fairs had to just naturally struggle with over time. As something gets more successful or grows, you know, can it sort of maintain its original mission, or sort of what does it look like? So I think that's kind of a really interesting evolution for a lot of these community festivals that started that way as well over the last few decades. So.
Well, I'm sorry to report our little half-hour snippet of time has come to an end, but hopefully this conversation will allow or encourage our viewers to jump online at chicagocollections.org and visit our digital exhibits that can be found the click in the upper right hand corner on our homepage. So we encourage you to visit the digital exhibit and to check back for future programming that I had mentioned. And again, sincere thanks to Molly and Autumn. I not only consider them colleagues, but also my friends. So it was just fun to be able to have this opportunity to talk to you, and thank you again for all your work on the digital exhibit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.